My sister's jealousy had always lingered beneath the surface, a quiet poison I learned to live with. I never imagined it could reach my daughter. That night, at a fashion launch that promised glamour, it did. My life in Austin had been peaceful, surrounded by Daniel, my loving husband, and Chloe, our creative, bright-eyed 12-year-old. My own childhood had been a maze of Bianca's cold perfection and my parents' blind favoritism. Eleanor and Robert adored her, excused her cruelty, and left me constantly measuring up. When the invitation arrived, lavish and elegant, addressed only to me and Chloe, I felt the sting immediately. Daniel was excluded, as if we were separate entities, unworthy of sharing her spotlight. I hesitated, unsure if we should expose Chloe to Bianca's world, but Daniel insisted. He wanted to believe in family, in reconciliation, and Chloe, excited by the glitter and dresses, was eager to go. I agreed, putting on a brave face, unaware that this night would unravel everything. As we prepared, a sense of dread settled over me, an instinctive warning that my daughter's innocence would collide with my sister's envy, and that my mother's response would change everything I thought I knew about loyalty and love. When we stepped into the venue, I felt like we had entered another world. The floors gleamed with polished marble, and crystal chandeliers sparkled overhead, sending light scattering in every direction. The air smelled faintly of expensive perfume and flowers, a mix that made my stomach twist with unease. Guests in designer clothes whispered and laughed quietly, their glances sharp and calculating, as if they were judging everything and everyone. Chloe clung to my hand, her eyes wide with awe and nervous excitement. She tried to smile politely at the elegant crowd, her small frame dwarfed by the extravagance around her. Bianca was at the center of it all, every inch poised and perfect. She moved like she owned the space, her laughter light but cutting, her eyes glinting with that familiar edge I had seen since childhood. She greeted us with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, her words layered with subtle digs and sarcasm. I could feel the tension in the air, and a familiar ache crept into my chest, the old discomfort of always being the lesser one, the one who never quite belonged. My parents hovered nearby, Eleanor and Robert's expressions neutral but distant, their attention clearly more for show than care. Their nods and polite smiles lacked warmth, reinforcing the silent hierarchy I had grown up with. I forced myself to focus on Chloe, reminding myself that this was her night too, even if it was under these pretentious circumstances. She twirled slightly, brushing her fingers over the folds of a display dress, her fascination pure and untainted. I watched her face light up with curiosity, her excitement reminding me why we had come. Despite the tension, I wanted her to enjoy the event, to feel a part of something grand, even if the people around us seemed cold and calculating. We moved slowly through the room, making polite small talk with other guests, trying to blend in without drawing attention. Every so often, Bianca would glance our way, her smile tight and sharp, as if measuring our place in her carefully curated world. I kept reassuring Chloe in quiet whispers, telling her she was brave, that she looked amazing, that none of this mattered as long as we had each other. But my heart remained heavy. I could feel the old insecurities creeping in, the silent comparison, the lingering resentment, the constant awareness of my family's favoritism. It wasn't just the crowd, it was the history, the patterns of behavior repeating themselves in this glittering, intimidating setting. Still, Chloe's energy gave me strength. Her eagerness to explore, her genuine interest in the designs, and her attempts to mingle gently with other kids reminded me that this night didn't have to be a nightmare. I focused on her laughter, her small triumphs in navigating the formal environment, and silently vowed to protect her, to shield her from the harshness that had always surrounded me. Even in a world so cold and glittering, I promised myself that Chloe's innocence and happiness would remain my priority, no matter how my sister or parents chose to behave. Chloe's curiosity got the better of her as she leaned closer to examine one of the dresses on display. She wanted to see the delicate details up close, her small fingers reaching out instinctively. I followed her, keeping a careful eye, but in the crowded, glittering room, it was easy to misjudge space. Suddenly, Chloe stepped back without realizing how close she was to a tall crystal sculpture. It wobbled precariously, then toppled with a crash that shattered the air like lightning. Pieces of glass and crystal flew in all directions, scattering across the polished marble floor. The sound was horrifying, sharp, explosive, and final. The crowd froze instantly. Conversations died mid-sentence. Glasses paused halfway to mouths, and the room was swallowed in a heavy, tense silence. I dropped everything I was holding and rushed to Chloe, my heart hammering, panic surging through me. She stood frozen, wide-eyed, her face drained of color. I didn't mean to," she whispered, her voice trembling, tiny hands trembling in front of her. Her apology was immediate, sincere, but I could see the fear in her eyes. Fear not just of the broken sculpture, but of the wrath it would unleash. I wrapped my arms around her, pressing her close, trying to calm her shaking body. "It's okay, honey. It's just an accident," I said softly, my own voice steadier than I felt. I wanted her to understand that mistakes happen, that accidents don't make her bad. But as I glanced around the room, I realized the eyes of every guest were fixed on us. Some stared in shock, some in judgment, and others with curiosity. Whispers began to ripple through the crowd, low and sharp, like the hiss of air escaping a punctured balloon. Bianca's expression hardened instantly. I could see the calculation in her eyes, the shift from polished control to barely contained rage. Eleanor and Robert stepped forward too, their gazes cold and assessing. The hush around us felt suffocating. I held Chloe tighter, shielding her as best as I could from the weight of attention, but I could feel their silent accusations pressing down on us. My stomach twisted at the thought of what would come next, knowing how quickly situations like this could escalate in her family's presence. Chloe's lips quivered, her breath shallow. I whispered again, "It's all right, sweetie. We'll get through this." But even as I tried to reassure her, I knew that the night had shifted. The sparkling room, the glittering lights, and the elegant crowd now felt like a trap. The accident had drawn a line in the air, separating us from the safety we had felt moments before. Every eye was on Chloe, and I could sense the storm gathering, poised to descend the moment my sister moved. I braced myself, gripping my daughter's hand, knowing that the innocence of her curiosity had just collided with the dangerous undercurrents of our family's pride and cruelty, and that nothing would ever feel the same again. Before I could even gather my thoughts, Bianca was in front of us, her eyes blazing and her hands clenched at her sides. The air seemed to crackle around her, her presence sharp and threatening. Chloe shrank instinctively behind me, small and trembling, trying to disappear, but Bianca didn't notice or care. Her voice cut through the stunned silence like a whip. She yelled, pointing at Chloe, her words dripping with venom. Every syllable was aimed to wound, to shame, and to humiliate my daughter in front of everyone. "Do you see what she's done? This is what happens when you're careless. She's ruined everything." The room seemed to grow colder with her fury. Guests shifted uneasily, unsure whether to intervene or watch the spectacle. Bianca's attack wasn't just verbal. It was deliberate, designed to make Chloe feel small and guilty. My stomach churned as I watched my daughter shrink further, her hands clutching my dress, her eyes wide and glossy with unshed tears. I tried to step forward to calm her, but Bianca ignored me completely. Then, as if on cue, Eleanor and Robert moved closer, their expressions tight and controlled, but their allegiance clear. They sided with Bianca immediately, their words quick and cutting. "This is why you need to manage her better, Cassie," Eleanor said sharply, her tone more accusatory than concerned. Robert added, "You should know better than to bring a child to such a refined event. Look at the mess." I felt my chest tighten, a mixture of disbelief and hurt washing over me. Their judgment wasn't even tempered by concern for Chloe. They were defending their favored daughter, reinforcing her rage, and dismissing my child's fear entirely. The humiliation pressed down on us like a heavy weight. Every whisper in the room, every sideways glance, seemed amplified by Bianca's anger. I could see the strategy behind it, making me look incompetent, Chloe guilty, and themselves the protectors of elegance and order. My heart ached for my daughter, who hadn't asked for any of this. She hadn't touched the crystal on purpose, hadn't tried to cause trouble, and yet here she was, the target of relentless scorn. Chloe's trembling intensified, but I kept my arms around her, trying to shield her as best as I could. I whispered, "It's not your fault, Chloe. Don't listen to them." But even my words felt fragile in that room, swallowed by Bianca's shouting and my parents' condemnation. I realized then how calculated it all was, how this was more than anger over a broken sculpture. It was a display, a show of control and power, meant to intimidate, to mark our place, and to remind me that in their eyes, my daughter's innocence meant nothing. I held Chloe tightly, feeling a surge of protective fury rising in me. I couldn't let them continue this. Their words were sharp, their judgment cold, but I would not allow my child to bear the full weight of their cruelty. The crowd watched silently, the tension thick, as I braced myself for what I knew would come next. understanding that this moment would define the rest of the night. I took a shaky step toward the exit, trying to lead Chloe away from the crowd and the storm of anger that had erupted. Her little hands clutched mine tightly, her body trembling with fear, and tears streaked down her cheeks. I whispered softly, urging her to stay calm, telling her we were leaving, that none of this was her fault. I thought that if we could just get out, the night might end without further disaster. But Bianca wasn't finished. Her fury didn't falter. If anything, it intensified as she realized we were trying to escape her wrath. Her eyes burned with rage, her lips twisted in a sneer that made my blood run cold. Without warning, she surged forward, moving past me with a force I wasn't prepared for. My heart skipped a beat as she grabbed Chloe, yanking her by the hair with no regard for the pain she caused. The girl's cry pierced through the room, raw and terrifying, and my stomach sank at the sound. Before I could react, the unthinkable happened. Bianca swung Chloe toward the nearest display, the sharp edge of a glass table catching her head. The sound was sickening, a sharp crack that froze the air around us. Chloe went limp for a heartbeat, then collapsed to the floor. Blood welled immediately from her forehead, a dark, frightening streak across her pale skin. My scream tore from my throat as I lunged to catch her, cradling her small, broken body in my arms. The crowd erupted into chaos. Gasps, shouts, and sudden movements filled the room, everyone reacting to the violence that had just unfolded. Guests scattered, some calling for help, others frozen in shock, unable to process what they had witnessed. The once elegant space now felt jagged and threatening, shards of crystal and glass scattered across the floor, reflecting the panic in jagged patterns. I could feel the weight of dozens of eyes on us, but my focus was entirely on Chloe, on the warmth of her blood, on her shallow, uneven breathing, and the terror etched into her young face. Bianca's fury hadn't softened. She stood back, chest heaving, as if proud of the chaos she had created, her expression hard and unyielding. My parents, Eleanor and Robert, seemed momentarily stunned, but I knew them. They would side with their daughter without hesitation. The room smelled faintly of perfume and fear, a sharp mix that made my head spin. I called out for help, my voice cracking, trying to reach anyone who could assist, while keeping Chloe close, shielding her from any further harm. In that instant, everything I had known about family, loyalty, and protection shattered. The night that had started with curiosity and anticipation had ended in violence and terror. Chloe's small body shook in my arms, her sobs breaking my heart, and I realized that nothing would ever feel safe again. Not in that room, not with my sister, and not with the people who were supposed to love us. The attack had crossed every line, leaving only fear, pain, and the urgent need to protect my child from the person who had meant to hurt her most. I sank to my knees beside Chloe, my arms wrapped tightly around her small, trembling body. Blood stained my hands and her dress, and my heart felt like it had shattered into 1,000 pieces. Her cries were raw and piercing, and every mother instinct in me screamed to protect her, to make this nightmare stop. I looked up, desperate for help, my eyes searching my mother's face. I thought she would rush forward, that she would comfort Chloe, that she would see the horror and act with care. But Eleanor didn't move toward my daughter. Instead, she stepped past me, her gaze fixed on Bianca. My stomach lurched as I heard her words, calm but sharp, meant to defend her own. "What have you done? Think of your career." She wasn't concerned about Chloe, about her grandchild's bleeding head or the fear in her eyes. She cared only about Bianca, about appearances and reputation. It was a betrayal so complete, so cruel, that my throat tightened and my knees felt weak beneath me. Eleanor turned slowly toward me then, her voice low and venomous, like a hiss that cut through the chaos around us. "You need to tell everyone she fell. You will not ruin your sister's life over an accident." The words hit me like a physical blow. My heart stopped for a moment, and I felt the room tilt around me. My mother, the person I had trusted to care for my child, was demanding I lie, forcing me to betray the truth and allow my daughter's suffering to be ignored. I held Chloe closer, trying to shield her from Eleanor's gaze, from the weight of her betrayal. The reality crashed over me. The family I had hoped would protect us, the parents I had counted on in emergencies, had chosen the other side. Their loyalty wasn't to their grandchild, it was to their favored daughter, and their values twisted around power and image instead of love and care. Every ounce of trust one had in them crumbled in that instant. Chloe whimpered, and I kissed the top of her head, murmuring that it was going to be okay, that I was here, and I would never let anyone hurt her like that again. My tears mixed with hers as I realized that no parent should ever face the choice between defending their child or obeying the orders of a relative blinded by favoritism. Eleanor's words burned in my mind, replaying over and over. The betrayal was sharper than Bianca's attack, more cutting than the glass shards at Chloe's feet. I felt rage, despair, and heartbreak all at once, but underneath it all, a fierce determination ignited. I would not stay silent. I would not protect my sister's reputation at the cost of my daughter's safety. I would rise from the floor, carry Chloe out of that room, and face the consequences myself. In that moment, the bond one once thought unbreakable with my mother was severed forever, and I understood that from now on, I could rely on only one thing without question: my love and protection for Chloe. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder until flashing lights filled the street outside. Within moments, uniformed officers and paramedics pushed through the crowd, moving quickly toward us. I stood frozen for a heartbeat, Chloe trembling in my arms, but as the reality of the situation hit me, a strange clarity settled over my panic. I knew what I had to do. My mind sharpened, cutting through the shock, and I prepared to speak the truth without hesitation. An officer knelt beside us, notebook in hand, and asked what had happened. I took a deep breath, my hands steady despite the adrenaline coursing through me, and I told them everything. I described the attack in detail, the way Bianca had lunged at Chloe, the violence of the motion, the sharp corner of the table, and the blood that followed. My words were precise, calm, and unwavering. I didn't add extra emotion or exaggeration. I just stated the facts, leaving no room for doubt. As I spoke, several guests stepped forward. Some had seen the attack clearly, others had heard the chaos and witnessed the aftermath. Each account reinforced my own, a chorus of confirmation that Bianca's actions were deliberate and dangerous. I could see the officers exchanging nods, the determination in their eyes growing as they processed the statements. The room that had moments ago been filled with luxury and judgment now felt stripped bare, all pretense fading under the weight of truth. Bianca didn't take this quietly. She screamed and protested, insisting it had been an accident, claiming Chloe had somehow caused it. But her voice was drowned out by the mounting evidence, and the officers remained unmoved. They reached for her, handcuffs clicking into place, and I felt a tense mixture of relief and lingering fear. Her resistance was futile, and I finally allowed myself a quiet exhale. Justice, however small, was beginning to take shape. The paramedics moved to Chloe, assessing her injuries, cleaning the blood, and preparing her for transport. I stayed close, offering reassurance with gentle words, my arms never leaving her, my attention fixed entirely on her safety and comfort. Chloe clung to me, her sobs quieting under the soft pressure of my voice, and I realized that leaving the chaos behind was the only way to protect her further. As we were guided toward the ambulance, I glanced back at the Vance family, standing frozen, their faces a mixture of shock, guilt, and disbelief. Eleanor and Robert looked as though they wanted to intervene, but had no authority to stop what was happening. I didn't look at them longer than necessary. There was nothing left to salvage there. Not for Chloe, not for me. Once inside the ambulance, I held Chloe close, feeling her pulse calm against mine, listening to the soft beeping of the monitors. The city lights flickered past the windows, but my mind was focused entirely on her. The Vance family, the venue, the attack, they were all behind us now. In that moment, I realized that leaving them behind wasn't just a choice. It was survival. Chloe was safe, and for the first time since the night began, I allowed myself to believe that we could start moving forward. The courtroom felt heavy, every sound echoing off the high ceilings. Faces stared from the benches, some curious, some judgmental, but I focused only on the task ahead. The Vance family sat together, poised and defensive, ready to defend Bianca. Eleanor and Robert whispered among themselves, trying to shape the story in their favor. They painted me as the jealous sister, exaggerating a minor accident, and I could feel the tension in the air as their words tried to cast doubt on everything I had experienced. I exchanged a glance with Daniel, who gave me a small, steady nod. We had prepared for this moment for weeks, gathering every piece of evidence that could show the truth. Medical reports detailing Chloe's injuries, statements from guests who had witnessed the attack, even security footage capturing Bianca's actions. Every detail meticulously collected to leave no room for lies or distortion. I felt the weight of responsibility, knowing that Chloe's safety and justice depended entirely on this moment. When my name was called, I rose and walked to the stand, keeping my voice steady despite the nerves twisting in my stomach. I swore to tell the truth and began recounting the events that had led to that night. I described the attack on Chloe clearly, without exaggeration, letting the evidence speak for itself. I could see the jury leaning in, absorbing every word, the gravity of what had happened finally settling around the room. Then I spoke about the patterns that had shaped our lives, the favoritism, the constant comparisons, the cold indifference from my parents whenever Bianca was involved. I explained how those dynamics had allowed jealousy and entitlement to flourish, ultimately leading to a moment where my daughter had been attacked. Each word carried the weight of years of frustration and fear, and I could feel the power of truth pushing back against the false narrative the Vance family had tried to construct. Witnesses were called, one after another, each account reinforcing mine. A guest described Bianca's rage and the way she had lunged at Chloe. Another recounted seeing my parents' dismissive reactions, their concern only for appearances rather than the child's well-being. Security footage was played, showing every movement, every act of aggression. The evidence built a picture so complete that it left little room for denial. By the time I finished my testimony, I felt exhausted but resolute. I had spoken for Chloe, for her innocence, and for the truth that my family had tried to hide. The courtroom had transformed from a place of intimidation into a space where honesty and justice could finally prevail. Even as my parents and Bianca fumed quietly in their seats, I knew that this was more than a legal battle. It was a statement that their cruelty and favoritism could no longer harm us. For the first time, I felt a sense of control, a small but powerful reclaiming of the narrative that had been stolen from me for so long. I returned to my seat beside Daniel, holding Chloe's hand firmly in mine, ready for whatever came next. The fight was far from over, but at that moment, the truth was on our side, undeniable and strong. The courtroom was tense as the verdict was read. Bianca sat stiffly, her usual arrogance stripped away, replaced by shock and disbelief. The judge's words were clear and final. She was guilty. Years in prison awaited her, a sentence that reflected the severity of her actions and the danger she had caused. Relief and exhaustion washed over me simultaneously. Justice had been served, but the path to this moment had been long, painful, and emotionally draining. Even as Bianca's sentence was announced, I couldn't help but notice the subtle shifts in the room. My parents, Eleanor and Robert, exchanged uneasy glances, suddenly aware that their attempts to protect Bianca and control the narrative had consequences. The legal system had not ignored their role in the chaos. Evidence of their pressure on me to lie and manipulate the story had led to separate charges. They were convicted of obstructing justice and attempting to intimidate witnesses, receiving probation and community service. While it was not a harsh punishment, it was a formal acknowledgement that their behavior was unacceptable and had contributed to the harm inflicted on Chloe. I felt a mixture of vindication and emptiness. The law had recognized the wrongs, but the emotional wounds were far from healed. Seeing Bianca taken into custody was a relief, but it was impossible to ignore the scar left on my daughter, the betrayal of my own mother, and the years of manipulation and favoritism that had culminated in this moment. The victory was necessary, yes, but it was not joyful. It was a cold acknowledgement that some wounds could not be erased simply by a sentence. Outside the courtroom, the air felt lighter, though still heavy with the weight of the ordeal. Chloe clung to my hand, her steps careful but steady. She had witnessed the consequences of cruelty and deceit firsthand, and I silently vowed to help her heal, to show her that there was strength in truth and courage in standing up for herself. The legal system had offered a form of protection, but the real work of recovery lay ahead, in nurturing trust, safety, and love within our small family. For the first time, I felt a sense of clarity about boundaries. The family that had caused so much pain, through Bianca's violence and my parents' enabling behavior, was no longer untouchable. They were accountable. The court had formalized what I had known instinctively for years. Favoritism and entitlement could not excuse cruelty. I could finally release the burden of trying to manage their behavior or protect them from consequences. Their actions were theirs alone. Walking out of the courthouse, I felt a cautious freedom. Chloe's small hand in mine reminded me why I had fought so hard. Daniel stayed close, his presence steady and unwavering, a quiet support through every step. We had survived the storm, and while the emotional recovery would take time, the legal reckoning had drawn a line. The family that had once held power over us now faced the consequences of their choices, and that recognition, however limited, was a crucial step toward peace and healing. Months had passed since that night, and our lives had shifted into a quieter, safer rhythm. Our new home felt like a sanctuary, free from the tension and judgment of the Vance family. Each room carried only the memories we were building together: laughter, homework at the kitchen table, and Chloe's art scattered across the living room floor. There were no reminders of cruelty, no whispers of favoritism, just space to breathe and heal. Chloe had come a long way. Her scar was barely noticeable now, a faint line on her forehead, but more important than the physical healing was the change in her spirit. She had started to regain confidence, to smile freely again, and to trust that she was safe. Watching her rediscover joy in small things, the way she twirled in her new dresses, the way she laughed at silly jokes, filled me with a quiet relief and pride I hadn't felt in years. Daniel and I had also found our balance. We were no longer reacting to the chaos of others, but focusing on building our own life, our own family. The experience had tested us, shaken us, but it had also shown us the strength we had together. The love between us felt renewed, tempered by the struggles we had faced and the choices we had made to protect Chloe. Every day, I saw the value of creating a safe environment, a home where judgment and cruelty had no place. I often reflected on what we had endured, on the court battles, the betrayal, and the fear that had once filled every corner of our lives. What we gained was more than legal victory. It was freedom. By stepping away from the family that had caused so much harm, we had reclaimed control of our lives. We had chosen justice over forgiveness, action over passive suffering, and in doing so, we found peace that no one could take away. Sitting with Chloe at bedtime, or sharing quiet moments with Daniel, I realized that protecting our own well-being sometimes required difficult choices, courage, and letting go of toxic ties. Our home was now a place of love, safety, and growth. We had endured fire and emerged stronger, not just surviving, but truly living. To everyone who followed our journey, I want to say thank you. It wasn't easy, but sometimes the bravest thing you can do is choose your own peace and protect those you love. We didn't just survive, we built a life free from fear, and that freedom is worth everything.